Welcome, everyone. I'm Julie Kaplan, Manager for Public Programs at the Center for Jewish History. On behalf of the Center and the Leo Baeck Institute, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Out of the Box, Snapshots of a Life, a story from the archives of the Leo Baeck Institute. Specifically, the items come from the collection of Emil Carl Grossmann, and you'll be hearing more about him in a moment. This is our fourth Out of the Box program, but the first one we are doing virtually on Zoom. At the Center for Jewish History, there are tens of thousands of boxes in our partners' archival collections, filled with photographs, journals, letters, and documents. In this series, we take these treasures out of the box. The Center for Jewish History plays a vital role as a renowned research institute for scholars, as well as a destination for public programs and exhibitions, and a place to explore genealogy. Our partners, the American Jewish Historical Society, the American Sephardi Federation, the Leo Baeck Institute, the Yeshiva University Museum, and the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, together possess the largest repository of Jewish archival material outside of Israel. Just one housekeeping item. We have turned off the chat function for this webinar. Please enter your questions using the Q&A function, and we'll address as many of them as we can. In addition to our narrator, Center Archivist Sarah Glover, we are thrilled to have Emil Grossmann's daughter, Barbara, here today to answer your questions during the Q&A. And now, to welcome you on behalf of the Leo Baeck Institute and to introduce the program, I'm pleased to turn this over to Michael Simonson. Michael is the head of the Reference Department and the Director of Public Outreach for the Leo Baeck Institute, where he has worked for 17 years. He will also be moderating and answering questions during the Q&A. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for the nice introduction. My name is Michael Simonson, and as you heard, I am the Director of Reference Services at the Leo Baeck Institute. The Leo Baeck Institute was founded in 1955 by Rabbi Leo Baeck himself. It was founded originally in Jerusalem, and then quickly a new branch was opened in London, and then in New York was the biggest branch. And the idea was to collect and preserve German Jewish history and culture through library and archival work that had been nearly lost in the Shoah. The collection we're going to talk about today is often used in physical public tours when people come to the Center of Jewish History, which the Leo Baeck Institute is a part of. Sarah Glover shows the collection material and talks about it a little and answers questions. Because of COVID, we decided we would take this program and we would put it on Zoom so people far and wide could enjoy it and learn more. I wanted to add as a special surprise that leads to a very special guest today. When we decided to put this on Zoom, we were contacted by actually the daughter of the man whose archival collection this is. We had had no contact with her previously. So this is very exciting for us as well. And she's joining us today. And she will also be here to answer any questions that you might have about the collection. I'll be here to answer questions about the Leo Baeck Institute, about more general questions perhaps about German Jewish history you may have. And the processing archivist who worked directly with this collection, Sarah Glover, will also be here to answer questions that might be specific to her knowledge. So Sarah, I will let you begin the actual program, and I will see you after for the question and answer part, as well as introduce the audience to the daughter of Emil Carl Grossmann. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be able to join my colleagues Julie Kaplan and Michael Simonson in welcoming you to today's talk, Snapshots of a Life, a story from the archives of the Leo Baeck Institute, which is a part of our Out of the Box series. And I'm also so thrilled to be able to welcome you virtually to the Center for Jewish History, which you can see here at 15 West 16th Street. And my name is Sarah Glover. I am an archivist and digitization projects liaison at the center, and I will tell you a little bit more about what that means exactly once I welcome you inside. Let me first bring you through the Great Hall, which you can see to your left, and this is where, under normal circumstances, I would be able to feed you cookies and kosher wine after the talk. I'm sad that I will not be able to do that today, but hopefully very soon I will see you all once again in the Great Hall. And I do hope that you will save up your questions throughout this talk, write them on paper, tell them to your parent, whatever you have to do, because I do want to hear your thoughts, comments, and questions at the end. And from the Great Hall, I will bring you down into what we call the sea level. And this is my home away from home. This is the level of the building on which we have a digital lab, a conservation lab, a metadata lab, and also to the right here, you'll see this very well-lit, very welcoming room. That is the processing lab. And that is where my fellow center archivists and I get to do the incredible, rewarding work of going through the collections that our 5 partner organizations bring in. And it is my distinct pleasure that I get to very often focus specifically on the collections of the Leo Baeck Institute, which, as you've heard, is the German Jewish archive in the building. And one of the things that makes the Leo Baeck Institute so unique is that the collections that I get to work on for them are very often the collections of everyday people. The Leo Baeck Institute was founded in 1955 by German Jews who really truly believed that the history of German Jewry had come to an end. And it was their mission to record that history, to collect whatever was left. And they did this by collecting from everyday people who had managed to escape Nazism and immigrate to the United States, their photo albums, their baby books, scraps of hair. I've had a collection that had a lost tooth in it, but also things more like photographs, diaries, war records, restitution records, military medals, just anything and everything that documented the extraordinary history of Jews in German-speaking lands. And what I get to do when these questions come down to me, as you can see, this whole room is filled with collections. This cart to the right is filled with collections. And they come to us in all manners. Sometimes they come in nice boxes. Sometimes they come in bags. Sometimes they come in crates. Sometimes they come in shopping bags. I say this often, and it is true every time I say it, that there was one crazy year that every single collection, I'm pretty sure, showed up in a fresh direct box. I don't know why. That's just what happened. But whatever container it comes in, what I and my fellow archivists get to do is go through these boxes, to sort through the materials, to see what's there, to really find the stories that are in the boxes. And then what we do is we write up what's called a finding aid, which is a research guide, because our ultimate goal is for researchers to come into the building, use these materials, learn from them, and discover the stories in the boxes for themselves. And sometimes the collection can be many, many boxes, more boxes than you see in this room at this time. And sometimes the collection can be just one box. And that is the story of the collection I will be telling you about today, which is the Emil Carl Grossmann collection held by the Leo Baeck Institute. And this collection, the entire contents, fit in one manuscript box. And what a manuscript box is, if you look at the cart on your right, in the middle row all the way to the left, the small gray box that measures actually only 6 inches across, that is a manuscript box. And what I want you to take from this next photo is not how extremely excited I look when I get to talk about this collection, which I've done before, and I love doing it every time, but what I really want you to take away from this photo is that the whole context of this collection is laid out on the table, and that's it. It's just these materials that you see here, some photo albums, scrapbooks, a couple of documents, and The Leo Baeck Institute also holds materials of a great many luminaries, scientists, writers, artists of all kinds. Since Michael Simonson is here, you should definitely ask him later what his favorite Albert Einstein photo is, because the Leo Baeck Institute has all manner of Einstein paraphernalia as well. But what's really interesting to me is the stories of these everyday people, like the one I'm going to tell you today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how when you don't know a lot about a person, for example, I'd heard of Einstein, but when I first started working in the Emil Carl Grossmann collection, I had never before heard of Emil Carl Grossmann. And so I'm going to tell you how to look at just the materials that are on this table and see what we can learn from them and what these materials can tell us. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our hero, Emil Carl Grossmann. And when I first opened up his box and I saw his ID photo, I was already pretty sure that we were going to get along very well, and that is because his is the only ID photo I've seen before, after, during processing his collection that includes someone just casually smoking a pipe. And I think we're already getting a little bit of a sense of the man just from this photo. We can also take a moment here to point out a couple important biographical details about him. He was born in Vienna on February 16th, 1907. And you will see a small discrepancy here. In the caption, I have spelled his name Grossman with only one N, whereas in his ID photo, if you can read the handwriting, you can see that it's Grossman with two N's. And this was a fairly common thing for German Jews. Those with the double N to do is to remove an N when they came to the United States, a way to just Americanize their names just a little bit. So we're starting from zero here. So what can we learn about Emil Grossmann? Well, the first very, very apparent thing I can tell you about him is that he had a strong and abiding love of the theater. From the time he was a young man living in Vienna, he was already attending the theater. You can see here he had the pleasure of seeing Josephine Baker perform in Vienna in March 1928. And this book that you see her autograph in, this is actually a scrapbook he kept of many of the playbills and autographs, and also it has a record of the plays that he saw throughout his life. And you can see here, this is the page where he notes seeing Josephine Baker's play in March of 28. And you see not only the date, the second column, it has his notation for what theater the performance was in, the title of the show, and there's a column after that for the type of performance. Was it a revue, an operetta, a comedy? And then the final column is for composers or artists who were in the performance. And you can also see, and this is a little later, after spoiler alert, he does immigrate to America. This is a record of some of the shows he saw on Broadway. And what you can also see here is that he developed his own rating system. And so, for example, he gave the widely beloved Oklahoma 4 stars, and he gave a musical called Allegro only 1 star. And if you're like me, you have heard of Oklahoma, but you have not necessarily heard of Allegro. And the reason that is, as I discovered when I looked it up, is that Allegro was Rodgers and Hammerstein's follow-up to Oklahoma, and it was, as the New York Times said, the first time that Rodgers and Hammerstein fell flat on their faces. So it seems that Emil was quite discerning, and his ratings aligned with the good tastes of the critics. I will point out here that, as far as I can tell, his rating system only goes to 4 stars. I don't know it theoretically went to 5 stars and he was just very picky, or 4 stars was the max, but I've only ever seen in his notes his rating system going up to 4 stars. So it means he really liked Oklahoma. And you can see from this page here that he was going to the theater up until just 2 months before he died. The last entry here is from October 93, and he passed away on December 17th, 1993. The other thing that is extremely apparent from his collection is that he was a very skilled amateur photographer. This is a series of images from his trip to America in 1929. And you can see here, these are some scenes of New York. And in the next couple slides, I've blown them up a little bit, just so you can see just all the details of these incredible photos. The first one being of Little Italy in New York. The next of an elevated station in Brooklyn. And this one of Chinatown, also in New York. Of course, he also took photos of his home back in Europe, including of the positive aspects, of course. You can see both from this image and from the several other pages of images of boxers that are in this album that not only was he a great photographer, he also had a strong love of boxing. But you can also see that he recorded some of the not as good parts of not only the history that he experienced, but the history of his country. And this next page is where we really see the evidence of his first major brush with history. This is a group of images dating from 1927 to 1934 that document the two most well-known events in the very, very stormy and troubled history of the First Austrian Republic, which lasted from 1919 until 1934. And Emil would have lived through that whole time period. And when this republic was founded as a parliamentary system, it was from its beginning very fractured and fragmented, and tensions were high throughout the 20s and early 30s, to the point that many of the political parties across the spectrum, left to right, had their own paramilitary wings, which just really shows you how tense things really were. And these tensions often boiled over into skirmishes and other conflicts in the streets of Vienna, where Emil lived. And you can see the top 3 photos here. The caption is "The Palace of Justice after July 15th, 1927. And what this refers to is a series of events that actually started in January 1927, in which an encounter between left-leaning paramilitary forces and right-leaning paramilitary forces resulted in the death of a child and a World War I veteran. Those who were responsible, those among the right-leaning paramilitary forces who were responsible for these deaths were brought to trial, but they were actually acquitted. And this acquittal resulted in a general strike and protests, eventually leading to the burning of the Palace of Justice in Vienna by left-leaning protesters. And the photos at the top are photos that Emil took after the Palace of Justice was burned. The set of 5 photos on the bottom are from slightly later, 1934, which Emil has listed as the revolt. This is also known as the Austrian Civil War. And what happened in this case is that actually a year prior, in March 1933, Austrian Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss had suspended the Austrian parliament. He had banned some political parties, as well as banning the paramilitary arm of the left-leaning Social Democrats. This ban was not actually really enforced on this paramilitary group until February 1934. And when they did try to enforce this ban of the right-leaning paramilitary against the left-leaning paramilitary, skirmishes ensued. And the Austrian army, under order from Dollfuss, entered on the side of the right-leaning paramilitary. The left-leaning paramilitary actually took shelter amongst their supporters in these civilian areas, these buildings you can see to the left and the right. And the army and the right-leaning troops actually shelled the civilian residences in which the left-leaning paramilitary was barricaded. You can see in the middle here a monument. This is actually the monument of the First Republic. And it's kind of hard to see because it's covered up, but originally it's 3 busts of the founders of the Republic. But in this image, it's covered with flags of the right-wing Fatherland Front. And this image really foreshadows strongly the front's authoritarian rule of the federal state of Austria, starting in May 1934 and lasting until the Anschluss. On a slightly happier note, I can tell you that after he immigrated, which he did in March of 1938, Emil continued to take photographs. This photo album that you see here with the beautiful graphic cover is a series of photographs from the 1939 World's Fair held in Queens. This page here is just a page of several of the amusements to be found at the World's Fair. And then you also see here one of the many pavilions at the fair, this one of the Eastman Kodak Pavilion. And again, from these photos, we can see Emil's sense of humor. For example, he went to the zoo in Houston in 1940, and where other people saw a series of primates, he saw Adolf Hitler and several other Nazis. So besides Emil, besides the monkeys, who else is in this collection? Well, let me introduce you now to Rose Lehrberger, seen here in this photo, who was Emil's wife. And we also have their wedding announcement. They were married on June 27th, 1942. And I want you to please remember that date, June 27th, 42, because it'll be very important in a moment. But put it aside for just a second. I'm going to show you a letter from May 42, about a month prior. And this is a letter that Rose wrote to Emil. She actually wrote it to Dear Sir, and why it says just to Dear Sir will become clear in a moment. The letter is in German, and I'm going to read you now an English translation. Dear Sir, you are looking for a modest girl, and that is me. I have been in the country for 4 years on my own. 5'3" tall, slim, good character. Today I am 26 years old. Unfortunately, it is not possible for me to make the acquaintance of a nice young man in any other way. If you want to know more about me, you can reach me at the following phone number. I would be happy to hear from you soon. P.S. Unfortunately, I do not have a picture at hand. So the question I have for you is, what is this letter? And try and yell it loud enough I can hear your answer from wherever you are. I'm going to give you a minute to think about it before I tell you that this seemingly extremely odd letter is kind of like swiping right on an app in modern day parlance. It is a response to a personal ad that Emil placed in the newspaper. And if you were from the world of German Jewish emigres, you would know that if you were looking for a spouse, a job, or anything else, the place to put your ad would be in the Aufbau, which was the paper of record for the German Jewish community in New York City. And very fortunately for us, the Leo Baeck Institute has actually digitized the Aufbau in its entirety, and so I had a pretty good hunch that if I was looking for a personal ad placed by a German Jewish immigrant, that the Aufbau is where I would find it. So I went through the issues for May, and lo and behold, on May 1st, 1942, I found this notice. Seeking a modest, nice, employed young woman, 26 to 31 years old, maximum 5'3", for the purpose of marriage. I have a secure position. Letters with exact details and picture under LN 1841M. So there are a couple of things to point out here. The first is I've talked about Emil a couple of times now, and one of the first questions that is always asked is, was he short? Which could be important. It could be an important question, and I think it's because he's looking for someone maximum 5'3", and at the very end of my presentation, you will see a photo of him and Rose, who we know is 5'3", and then I think you can decide for yourself whether or not he was short. The second thing is he asked for an age range of 26 to 31 years old, and Rose writes in her letter, "Today I am 26 years old," and she doesn't mean I am currently 26 years old. Rose was born in Frankfurt am Main, Germany on May 2nd, 1916. So she's responding to something written May 1st, 1942. She is saying, today, actually on my birthday, I am turning 26 years old. So both in terms of age and in terms of height, she was the absolute perfect fit. And the last thing to notice is at the end, there's a reference number, LN 1841M. That's because when one would post an advertisement in such a newspaper, you wouldn't put your name. You'd be assigned a reference number. And then people would write to the Aufbau offices referencing that series of numbers and letters. The Aufbau would gather them all up for you and send them off to you. And in case there was any doubt that this is Emil's ad in the Aufbau, you can see at the top of Rose's letter, LN 1841M. And so one of the other questions I have when I read this letter is, what has brought Rose here? What has brought her to be 26 years old and writing a letter in which she is saying, I'm on my own, I have no way to meet people. What's going on in her life at this moment? And I can tell you a little bit that I know about Rose. I'm going to start here with a picture of Rose and her parents, Emil and Lena Lehrberger. And I can tell you that Rose herself left Germany in December 38, and she arrived in the United States on January 6th, 1939. And from the minute she arrived in the United States, she desperately tried to organize visas for her parents so that they could join her in America. Unfortunately, Rose was ultimately unsuccessful. Her parents were deported to Theresienstadt on September 16th, 1942. And we can see here, this is a memorial page of the type you can find on Yad Vashem's website in their database of Holocaust victims. And we can see here that Emil Lehrberger died in Theresienstadt on February 9th, 1943. And we can see here from Lena Lehrberger's memorial page that she died in Auschwitz at an unknown date. And here is where I want to point out the why of this whole story. Why am I telling you this? Why is it important to hear about this person who had this sense of humor and who took photographs and who placed an ad in a newspaper? Why is this story important? And I mean, first of all, I'm just a believer that every story is important. It's probably one of the reasons that I'm an archivist. But aside from my personal feelings, I think what's really crucial to point out here is that I think we think of archives as this very static, often the word dusty is used, thing where something's happened and we put it in a box and then it goes on a shelf. And we think of, at this point in 2020, the Holocaust of something that's kind of far away. But this story is a very recent story, and this story is one that's in many ways echoing still today, even amongst people who could not be further away from German Jewry. There are still people coming to the United States. There are still people coming to New York who are on their own, who are escaping terrible circumstances, who are coming here looking for a spouse, a person, a better life, any way to put themselves back together. And I think that's one of the many things that's so interesting about this story, is not only what it teaches us about the very specific past that it comes from, but what it teaches us about broader history and broader cultural moments. And I love that we can see all of this and all of these stories coming out of just this one box. And I want to not forget Emil and Lena. But I do want to end on a slightly happier note with this final image from one of Emil's photo albums. This is Rose and Emil on their honeymoon, June 27th to 29th, 1942. And when I asked you to remember that her letter was from May 42, this is why, because they were married, they were on their honeymoon the next month. And as you can see here, they are standing next to each other. And like I said, we know she is 5'3", and it looks to me like they are about the same height. So if you were still wondering the answer to the question, was he short? Yes, I can tell you that he was in fact short. And with that, I would like to say thank you to all of you for listening today. My telling of the story of Emil ends here, but we're not done yet with this story. There's much more to come in the Q&A, so I hope you have saved up all those questions. First, I want to say a big thank you to the many people who helped me make this possible for you today, including, of course, first of all, the Leo Baeck Institute. It is their amazing collection and my pleasure to work on it. And I would like to point out that, like almost all of Leo Baeck's collections, this collection has been digitized in its entirety. So you can go to archives.cjh.org or search.cjh.org, your choice. You can search for Emil Carl Grossmann and you can see the entire collection, every page of his remarkable photo albums. I would also like to thank Janine Viju, Archivist, for digitizing images for me to use in this collection, Gemma Solomons and the New York Adventure Club for the event photography, and my boss, Andre Fomanov, Archival Services Manager, for editing the video and syncing up the audio for me. A big thanks to them, a big thanks to you all once again, and I am looking forward to talking with you in the question and answer session.
Before we begin that question and answer period, I had mentioned earlier that we had a special guest with us today. Barbara Grossman saw the advertisement for this event, and in fact, she is the daughter of Emil Carl Grossmann. So we're very happy to have her with us today And I wanted everyone in the audience first to see her, because we've seen all these pictures of her parents, and also to maybe talk a little bit what she would like to talk about a few minutes about her family. And we've got the presentation. So Barbara, you can go ahead and.
Thank you. Thank you all for being there, and thank you for the Leo Baeck Institute for archiving both my parents' papers. It's very meaningful that they have a real home. Well, the first thing I would like to comment on is Emil Carl Grossmann never used his middle name, but he was very proud that Karl was spelled with a C and not a K. And I'm not sure what that implies, but he always made a big deal about that. He also said that the N was removed at Ellis Island by one of the functionaries who, moved all these immigrants through. But I did notice just now in watching the program that the wedding announcement had 2 N's. So I guess he didn't abandon that N until afterwards, which I thought was kind of interesting. I didn't know that. He came to the United States, as you saw, in 1929, but he came via Cuba, Havana, Cuba, because there are photographs of Havana in 1928. And he came here wanting to stay, but he couldn't get a visa. So he had to go back to Vienna. He absolutely did not want to do that, as far as I knew. And so he returned. About Texas, which is also kind of curious because he never lived anywhere but New York City, but he was drafted. Before he even became a citizen, he was drafted by the United States Army, and that's why he was in Texas. He didn't have much nice to say about Texas, but he obviously entertained himself by going to the zoo on his day off, I guess. Another thing that might be interesting to you all is that he liked boxing. But he actually had a job. He was a referee. And therefore, he took all these pictures of boxers. And as far as I knew, in my lifetime, he never went to a boxing ring. But he did work in a bar, restaurant near Carnegie Hall for a while. And a very famous boxer used to go there all the time. And I think his name was Barney something, Barney Ross, that's what it was. Anyway, so that was his big deal boxing thing. He didn't follow through. He was a bit of a jock though. He played soccer and he skied. And when he came here, he didn't do anything until he was very old. And then he became a competitive swimmer and won, which was kind of a shock. And so just to say, he took photographs his whole life. He stalked me. I hated being photographed. And if you can ask my friends now, I do not like to be photographed. I guess it was just too much. However, when I was a student at Cooper Union, he lent me his very precious Rolly, and I learned to take photographs with a Rolodex, which Rolleiflex, not a Rolodex. And that was very nice. I had to return it, but it was a very good camera to learn how to compose. And it was a very good camera. And I don't know actually what happened to it, but he obviously replaced it and took pictures for the rest of his life. So bring on the questions.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting because, you know, as an archive, we get the archival material, the actual photographs, the documents, even the letters. But without having contact with the family, we often don't get these very personal connections, or we aren't able to always go as in depth with
Right.
the various articles that we receive. So it's wonderful actually to have you here, a member of the family, to provide more depth to the material we have. So thank you. Thanks for contacting us.
Well, I was surprised to see that just on my feed. And I thought, well, this is a nice opportunity. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you followed through.
That was a great surprise for us. So I do have some questions here. And so the first question is from Rachel Harrison. And she asked, was Rose also artistic?
No,
No, because I know that you're an artist, and I figured
I'm a
this question's
painter.
related to that.
Well, she was, she did some very nice knitting and crocheting, but as far as making things, I mean, she was really good at that, but I don't think that was too uncommon.
Yeah, yeah. Another question, which I will answer, from Bernice Heilbrunn. How does someone go about donating records of German Jewish immigrants to LBI? So Bernice, you would contact me actually. And to do that, you can go to the Leo Baeck Institute website, which is www.lbi.org. And just look for contacts, and you can just send an email through the main email, which is lbi@lbi.cjh, for Center for Jewish History, .org. And I can answer you. Yes, we're always collecting material. And I think this is a nice presentation because it gives you an example of some of the kinds of material we do collect. So thank you for that. There's another question which I think I can also answer from Wolfgang Nebmeyer. What I am interested in, is there an entry in the theater log about him meeting Greta Keller? It seemed rather unlikely he would not have. I don't know myself, and Sarah Glover, I imagine you don't know that you've done a lot of work with it.
I didn't want to interrupt you guys. We're doing so well without me.
Oh, that's not true.
I don't know either offhand, but I would be very happy to look through the photo album and find out. If you, Wolfgang, would like to email me, sglover@cjh.org. And as also I mentioned, this collection is completely digitized. So if you do want to go look for yourself, you can go to search.cjh.org, and you can type in the collection name, which is the Emil Carl Grossmann collection, or the call number, which is AR space 25611. And you can click through the page there. The whole thing is digitized. You can see every playbill, every autograph, every rating, anything you could possibly want to know is there for you. So I would encourage you to do that and also email me, and I'd be happy to check.
Mm-hmm. We've been very lucky at the Leo Baeck that we've managed to digitize almost all of our archival holdings as a result of private grants, which is amazing and wonderful for us. So our goal is to digitize the entire archives. And right now, I think we probably have about 85% digitized. And of course, we're always getting new stuff, but we're also always digitizing. So that's another good thing about if material is donated to us. Relating to Bernice's question earlier. In the end, with the permission of the families, we can digitize. If we know where the families are, Barbara, we can digitize the collection.
I think the left hand doesn't quite know what the right hand is doing.
Right. The donors. So so her parents' collection actually came through other relatives, right, Barbara? And you didn't know about it?
I did it.
Or right.
I did it with Frank Mecklenburg.
Yes.
No, I was the one who trundled those things into the the building.
Yeah, okay. I was wondering. So I actually had some questions too. Let me take more from the audience as well. But I wanted to ask quickly, Sarah, in your presentation, this isn't actually a question for you, but just a comment. You said in the first picture that you got a sense of him from the photo where he was leaning, smoking a pipe, at the very beginning. And Barbara, do you think that's true? That was a good depiction of your father and his personality?
Well, you know that bumper sticker that says, "Don't trust authority"? I think he wrote it.
Oh.
He was very rebellious. He was a very ornery fellow.
Right.
Yeah, so he did whatever he thought he wanted to do, but also knowing what was not acceptable and did it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know if smoking a pipe on your ID photo was acceptable, but he just did it, I'm sure.
Right, yeah. I'm surprised to see that too. I wouldn't think that would normally be done.
Well, they obviously didn't tell him to take it away. Somebody accepted it.
Mm-hmm. Barbara, one question here. Do you have more photographs?
No.
No?
I mean, yes, I have photographs, yes. But
Uh-huh.
they're family photographs, and they're mostly of the three of us. I have no siblings.
I,
Yes, I have those photographs, and I was saving them for my daughter.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. One question, let's see, there's a few questions here. This one is kind of for me, and I can say it quickly, by Pam Mendelson. What happens to things in various boxes that are deemed not suitable for archiving? Are they returned or what? Pam, that's up to you. That's completely up to you. You can specify that on the form. So, Wolfgang Nebmeyer asked, does LBI cooperate with Deutsche Cabaret Archiv in Mainz? Just in that it's another archive. And so if there was a project or something where resources were shared, but we don't have any active partnership right now. This one is from Laura Leone. Thank you, Sarah and Mike, for a marvelous presentation. It's great to see Barbara too. Laura used to work at the Center for Jewish History, so we know her. Barbara, did you have to do a lot of organizing of your parents' papers before donating them? And any surprises for you as you were going through them?
Well, my mother obviously kept these letters and papers her entire life. She died at 90, and she came here at 23, as you so stated. She obviously knew that they had real significance. For her, they did. And I kept them. And when I had moved, I thought, I have to find the right place for all this material. There wasn't too much to organize because there wasn't an overwhelming amount. And I can't read German script. So I mean, I just kind of doped it out and figured it out. I've archived other things that are much more complicated, like my husband's stuff, but it's not that much work, and it's worthwhile. It's really worthwhile work. It's very important to honor people for their lives, and if there's an institution or a place that wants it, then it's a very valuable to take that time. I mean, I did see some pretty shocking things, like a postcard from Dachau, which just actually stopped me from breathing for a minute, and I can't now remember exactly who that was, but so somebody in that group, my parents knew, or one of the grandparents was in Dachau for a while. But it's kind of revealing. You can dwell on these things. It all depends on your personality, how you process it.
Another question from Ilya. Did Emil and Rose talk about their pre-war lives in Europe?
A little bit. My mother was pretty tight-lipped about it all. People used to say, well, get her to talk. And I'd say, well, she's not Elie Wiesel. She isn't going to talk. And she would periodically, but they were horrible stories. And they'd come out in little bursts. There was no logic to why she was speaking. My father talked a little bit about it. And there are pictures in those photographs of his, playing out in the mountains, skiing with a bunch of friends, girlfriends, the kind of thing a gang of young people would do any day, any time in history, really. But yeah, they talked a little bit, but not extensively. I think they were both pretty traumatized, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, this goes into another question, I think, from Fred Kramer. Were they happy in the marriage, or was it largely silence?
I
mean, you don't have to answer that.
No, I mean, it wasn't silence. No, at all. No, that was not a particularly happy marriage. But I think both of them, my gut feeling is the reason you see they got married so quickly is there was this urgency. They just come off of this horrendous experience, and the urge to live and life was so potent that they married, and then they had a kid, and I think sometimes the reverse of a really horrible experience is to run towards life rather than away from it. And I think was their impulse. They were not really well suited, as opposed to the height and weight, which maybe worked. their personalities. They were both terrific people, but they really weren't suited to be together, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I hear many stories like this from that immigration time. And
yeah. Oh, I didn't think it was unusual, but
it wasn't unusual, to be sure. This is Nicole Kajori writes, "Hi, Mom."
Hi.
This is Nicole.
Those are her grandparents.
Mm-hmm. Emil's granddaughter. My question is, did he talk about photography with you?
That's a very good question. Not in depth, but he did talk about it a little bit, but not at great length. I think when I was a student and making photographs, then he talked a little bit about it, because I did a series of them, actually, very unusual portraits of them, and in black and white, actually. And he talked a little bit about it, but not as extensively as I would have thought. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another question from Al Cohen: who looks at these archives boxes, and why did you look at this box? So I can answer that quickly. This box was looked at as part of, we process all the material that comes in at the Leo Baeck Institute. Some of it is done in-house, so to say, and some of it is done through grants with the center. So Sarah Glover works for the center, but she processes archival collections on this funding. And so she was processing this, so just as she processes all kinds of Leo Baeck Institute collections. And then she found this, she thought this would be an interesting one to present when tours came to visit. Is that correct, Sarah? Would that be?
Yeah, and yes, that is correct. If I could say just a little more, I mean, the question of who looks at these boxes, there's a couple different answers to that. There's the practical answer of how did I get assigned to work on this collection, which is a lot of logistics of funding and who's available to do what when, and is not the interesting part of the story at all. And then there's the end result, which is why we do this at all, which I mentioned is because we want researchers, and researchers doesn't just mean academics, researchers means anyone who's interested. We want you people out there who are listening to us who, you know, someday soon will be able to visit us again, to come into the building and look at these materials. That's why we do all of this. So the ultimate answer is who's looking at these boxes. I hope you are the one looking at these boxes. And if the question is, why is this a collection I talk about a lot? I've been working in this profession for over a decade now. I've seen a lot of boxes, and this one has stayed with me. This is the one that when they asked me to start participating in behind the scenes tours, I knew immediately it would be this one. And if you work in an archive of German Jewish history, you see a lot of things. You see a lot of really terrible things. I have cried at my desk. I mean, you see a lot of really beautiful things. And what is really interesting about this collection is you can see there's just so much joy in these photos. And there's obviously also this story, this terrible story of Rose's family. And we know, you don't get over something like that. And we know that she didn't get over it ever. And how could you? But there's also so much life there. And I love that this collection, you can see both of those two things together in such a succinct fashion. So that is my very long answer to your question. And it is a way of saying that please come visit us and please come see all this stuff for yourself.
Thank you. Yes, to add to that, many people come to the Leo Baeck to do all kinds of research. It can be family research, it's academic research. So for example, right now with this collection, there's a researcher who's interested in the history of boxing in Austria. So they're very interested in these photographs of the boxers. And and how they come from all these different leagues. And there's also Jewish boxing leagues that are in those pictures. So they found this very interesting because this is what they're writing about. So you never know what people will be writing about. They can be writing about almost any kind of topic, and it may lead them to us at the Leo Baeck Institute. Let's see. One last question I think I'll ask. First of all, Nicole Kajori wrote again and said, wasn't the letter from Dachau to a stepfather? So
Whose stepfather?
I don't know. She'll have to answer. I'll see what she says.
There were no stepfathers
Yeah.
that I knew of.
Yeah.
I
know after the Kristallnacht, a lot of the men were taken into Dachau. That was.
There were no stepfathers that I knew of, but my mother did talk about Kristallnacht.
Yeah, it's likely her father was taken.
I think it's very possible.
For a while.
Yeah. And I mean, a little bit of history. He had been in World War I and been injured, and he had a bad leg and limped and used a cane, but he was German. And he did not recognize what was happening. And I guess that probably was the opening door of Kristallnacht. It became obvious that, whatever. Anyway,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, the theater book, I just want to note that theater book I did see growing up. And they had very little money, which is interesting to me that my father found money to go to the theater. And it probably wasn't exorbitant the way it is now. But they went to the theater all the time. And they never took me, which is, I thought, kind of interesting. I went to musicals occasionally, but I did not get taken. It was something that I guess my father got interested in and early on in his life and just pursued it. But that book was kind of extraordinary.
Yeah, that's an amazing document.
It's extraordinary. He was a bit obsessive, as you can see.
Yeah. I mean, that's also interesting from a research perspective. If anyone wants to know very precise history of the Viennese theater, they know where to come.
He had a box of playbills. He kept every playbill. Unfortunately, my mother didn't quite know what they were, and somebody said, "Oh, can I have those?" And she gave them. And I suspect there were some pretty interesting things in the box. But that was a long time ago.
Well, with that, we've reached the end of the program. So I guess I'll thank everyone for coming, first of all. And if you have any further questions, I know there's a few I didn't get to, please feel free to write me at, again, just go to our website, www.lbi.org, and search under contacts for general email, and it will reach me. And I can also divvy it up to Barbara or Sarah as need be. And I can also help you find collections in the catalog if you're having trouble locating them. So Sarah Glover actually left her email in the chat, and I'll leave mine right now too. Okay, good. All right, so thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you at the next event. Have a good afternoon. Thank you for coming, Barbara.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.